Today's episode of Classic Country Backstories is one that I'm really excited about. Merle Haggard is one of the most well-known and loved singer-songwriters of all time. I talked with the person who knows more about Merle than just about anyone. That would be his oldest son, Marty Haggard. Marty was gracious enough to share some amazing stories and lots of answers to questions about his dad. Join us on this journey through Merle Haggard's life and career. I promise you'll enjoy it. Nashville, Tennessee, country music capital of the world, home of the Grand Ole Opry, where singers and dreamers come seeking stardom. Join me as we learn about the lives and careers of those who built this town on Classic Country Backstories. Born Merle Ronald Haggard, April 6, 1937, in Oildale, California, near Bakersfield. His parents were Jim and Flossie Haggard, migrants of Chakota, Oklahoma. Jim worked for the Santa Fe Railroad as a carpenter. In 1935, he bought a Santa Fe Railroad boxcar for $500 and put it on a vacant lot. Then he added 2 rooms, plumbing, and a stove, along with some flowered wallpaper. Merle was born 2 years later. Merle had 2 older siblings, Lowell and Lillian. Merle's father died after suffering a stroke in 1946, leaving Flossie to go to work as a bookkeeper. Merle was 9 years old when his father passed, leaving him deeply affected by the loss. Merle's brother Lowell gave Merle his guitar when Merle was 12. Merle taught himself how to play by listening to records of Bob Wills, Lefty Frizzell, and Hank Williams. While Flossie was trying her best to support the family, Merle began to find trouble. Flossie was a fundamental Christian and a stern, somewhat overprotective parent, but Merle managed to run away from home several times and ended up in 2 reform schools from which he also escaped several times. Merle Haggard married Leona Hobbs in 1956. Together they had 4 children, Dana, Marty, Kelly, and Noel. By age 21, Merle was already married with his first child. He was working as a laborer and playing music when he could. He was also in and out of jail for passing bad checks and theft. In 1957, Merle got drunk and attempted to rob a Bakersfield roadhouse. He was caught and sent to jail in Bakersfield, California. After attempting to escape the jail, he was sent to San Quentin Prison on February 28, 1958. He became prisoner number 45200.
A lot of people, may think that you had a really easy childhood because you were Merle Haggard's son,
Yeah.
but you were born before your dad became successful, weren't you?
Yeah. He was in prison when I was born. And we were living in that old train boxcar everybody keeps hearing about. And I was born a couple months or so after Dad was put in San Quentin prison. Mama, me, and my oldest sister, Dana, we lived in a train boxcar. And of course, Mama worked picking cotton or, waitressing, whatever she could do to get by. But we were dirt poor. I didn't even know what real milk was till I was about 7 years old, 8 years old. All I ever knew about it was carnation powder milk. And
Hmm.
I got out of prison in 1960. I was up 3 years old at that point. And of course, that's when he made his decision to try to get in the music business and start playing the local bands around Bakersfield. And for about 3 or 4 years. And we were real poor. I mean, good grief. I don't remember us ever having a car. I think the only time we ever had a car is if Dad stole one.
But he was just trying to support you all at that point, right?
I'm sure he would come up with an excuse, why he stole that car.
Well, now, when he was in prison, there were a couple instances that happened to turn Merle kind of around, weren't there?
Yeah, mainly it was, probably the whole prison experience, it was probably a slow turn, a slow evolution. And he first got there, they sent him there from 6 months to 15 years. And
Wow.
he was, the law had considered him a, what I call a habitual criminal in 1958 when he was arrested for the first time as an adult. He was 18 years old, and they got to looking at his past run-ins with the law, from the time he was 12 years old till he was 18. He had been put in any and every kind of juvenile institution you could be multiple times. And I don't know how many times they arrested Dad as a kid, but I know he escaped from wherever they put him 17 different times. And that's what got him thrown into San Quentin. He escaped from the Kern County Jail when he was arrested for the first time at 18 years old as an adult. And the judge looked at that, that little jailbreak, and he looked at his past and said, and they defined or decided he was a habitual criminal, and sent him to San Quentin for 6 months to 15 years. And, when he first got there, I don't know that he took it that serious. He was, one of the first things he did when he got there was he made some homemade beer, got a bunch of prisoners drunk, and they put him in solitary confinement for a couple of weeks. And of course, they denied his parole at the end. Each year they would look at his record and determine whether to keep or release him. And this went on. He didn't play by the rules of the prison very well for a while, but eventually he made friends with an old man in prison. His name was Rabbit. They called him Rabbit. Rabbit was an older man. He's probably about my age right now. And Dad was 18 years old, 19 something thereabouts. And but Rabbit was in his cell with it. And Rabbit was doing 3 lives. I don't know what Rabbit did, but obviously he had killed somebody. But he was in there for 3 lives. He took Dad under his wing and become his friend. Kind of showed him the ropes. And of course, Dad sang songs with his guitar. And the old man liked his singing, and he was the one that Dad wrote "Sing Me Back Home" about, because Rabbit and a couple of prisoners come up with a way on how to escape San Quentin. And Dad wanted to go on that escape, but Rabbit talked him out of it. And Rabbit's the one that told him, he said, "Merle, you need to straighten up and get out of here and do something with your life before it's too late." He said, "You go with me, there'll be no turning back for you." He said, "But you need to get out of here and do something with music before it's too late for you." And but Rabbit and 2 other men did break out of San Quentin prison not too long after that conversation they had. And, the law caught up with them like they always do. And in the process of trying to take Rabbit and his friends back into custody, Rabbit killed a policeman trying to get away. And the 2 men that were with Rabbit were killed by the police. So it was a bad deal. And that's what Rabbit told my dad. He said, "Merle, you don't want to go with me on this prison break." He said, unless you're willing to die, he said, "you don't want to go with me, because I'm not coming back here without a fight." And he was true to his word. And but anyway, they tried him for shooting that officer of the law, found him guilty, and they sentenced him to die. When they brought him back to San Quentin to execute him, his last request before he died was that Dad sing him one more song. He had a song that his mama used to sing for him when he was a boy, and he wanted to hear that song one more time before he died. And that was his last request, and the warden allowed it. And Dad sang whatever that song was for Rabbit. After that, Rabbit was executed. And Dad experienced that and realized that the road he was on was really not working out too well. And but he had never thought about music as a way to make a living. But Rabbit was the one who got him thinking about it. He said, "You need to do something with music. Don't follow me." He said, "This ain't no life." About the same time all that happened, right after Rabbit was executed, Johnny Cash came into the prison and did a show in 1959, something like that, and for the prisoners. And Dad seen Johnny on stage and said, "Yep, that's what I'm going to do." And that's when he made his mind up to straighten up and get out of prison and start pursuing a life in music instead of this breaking the law stuff that wasn't working out too good for him. And it took him a little while. He started playing by the rules of the prison, got him a job in the prison, doing the hardest job they had available to prove he was ready to get out. And it was in 1960. 2 years and 9 months after they put him in, they finally let him out. He come home to Bakersfield, like I said earlier, and where me and my mama and my oldest sister were living in that boxcar. Dad went to work in the bands around Bakersfield about that time, and it took him a while to get a foothold, playing the local groups, and finally caught him a little break here and there. Somebody, Fuzzy Owen, recorded a little song on him, and they had a little independent record label called Tally Records. And Fuzzy was somebody in the business at that time. Bakersfield had a lot of good artists coming out of Bakersfield back then. People like Jeannie Shepherd and Berlin Husky and Buck Owens and, Tommy Collins, Wynn Stewart, some great music. And and Fuzzy had written a couple #1 records, actually. And he was kind of known in town. But Fuzzy cut that record on Dad. Wynn Stewart wrote it, called Sing a Sad Song.
Yep.
And Fuzzy promoted the song. He sold everything he had and borrowed every dollar he could get and promoted that record in 1963. And the song went top 20 in the country. And it was that song that stirred the interest of Capitol Records to sign Dad in 1964 to a major record deal. And of course, Fuzzy was co-producer on every one of those old records and was Dad's personal manager and remained his personal manager until Fuzzy died about a year and a half ago. And Fuzzy was 90 years old. And but he and Dad were partners, and Dad was his manager on Nothing But a Handshake all those years. And but from 1964 on, every single record was top 10 or better. And and of course, as I say, the rest was history. But it was in 1966 that Dad wrote "Sing Me Back Home," and he was looking at his career in '66. By then, he had 2 #1 records with "Swinging Doors" and "Bottle Let Me Down," and top 10 record and a top 20 record, and he just won the New Male Vocalist of the Year award. He was on his way, and he was thinking, man, how quickly things had turned around since San Quentin back in 1960, right? And he realized that the advice of that old man in San Quentin is what got him thinking on a positive way. And he wrote "Sing Me Back Home" about that old man. And so that song was it was a big hit too. It was #1. And, a lot of country artists back in the day always sang songs about prison and, breaking the law and stuff. But Dad was, but most of them were just singing songs. Dad was actually telling his life story, and that's what made his life and his music so unique. It was honest. It was about him. And it wasn't until after "Sing Me Back Home" that it became public knowledge that Dad was actually an ex-convict. He had never told nobody. And in fact, it was Johnny Cash. When Dad told him the story, why he wrote the song, Johnny told him, he said, "Merle, you need to let these people know why you're doing these songs, like Fugitive and Branded Man and all these prison songs. And, you let them know that this is part of your life. It's not some songs from your head, And Dad didn't want to do it. He was ashamed of that period of it, or that part of his life. But John convinced him that he needed to let people know. And that's after that song was when people found out that he was an ex-convict. But he was somebody, as they say, that, it was 12 years later, Dad was voted Man of the Year in Bakersfield by the same people that sent him San Quentin prison 12 years earlier.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's one of those great American stories, right? And and it was in '72, 12 years after he was released, that we were invited to the White House by the President of the United States. Spent a whole week in there, and I was there, and I was a 13, 14-year-old kid, and I always tell people jokingly that only in America can you go from the jailhouse to the White House in 12 years.
Merle and his wife, Leona, divorced in 1964. In 1965, Merle was signed to Capitol Records. His single, "All My Friends Are Gonna Be Strangers," entered Billboard's top 10. The song was written by Liz Anderson, mother of country singer Lynn Anderson. In 1965, Merle married Bonnie Owens, ex-wife of country singer Buck Owens. Haggard credited Bonnie for helping him make a big break as a country artist. Her distinctive voice can be heard on many of his early hits, such as "Sing Me Back Home" and "Branded Man," among many others. Merle wrote the song "Today I Started Loving You Again" for Bonnie. They divorced in 1978, but remained close.
I know in 1965, Merle married Bonnie Owens,
Mm-hmm.
and she's one that you hear all those harmonies on,
Mm-hmm.
all those early hits. Um, and I know Merle and Bonnie were divorced in 78, but she remained close to Merle, didn't she? And she traveled with him
Oh yeah.
and did background vocals for years after
Well, she still did the. Well, let me put this in chronological order the best I can.
that. Sure.
Bonnie, she sang the woman's harmony on all Dad's records from '65 and until Dad and Bonnie divorced. And
Sure.
now the male, a lot of people don't know this, but you know the through all those Capitol years, that '60s music, Glenn Campbell was the man singing the male vocal harmony on all those little
Didn't know
records.
that.
Yeah, Glenn and Bonnie were I'll never forget it. Bonnie, back in those days, by the way, they didn't overdub each individual harmony, the man and the women. They wouldn't
Right.
do it individually, one at a time. They'd do it together. And they'd get out there and put a microphone right out in the middle of the floor. And they spent a lot of time figuring out how close to the mic Bonnie would stand relative to Glenn. And they would do it live until they got a live balance. And they would record it. But Glenn sang all the harmonies on all those, and he did all the acoustic kickoffs on those records too, by the way. That rolly little thing on Mama Tried, and Sing Me Back Home on the acoustic guitar. That's Glenn. Glenn Campbell did all the acoustic work on Dad's records. And but anyway, back to the story of Bonnie. But she sang harmony on everything through the '60s and through the '70s until '78 when they got their divorce, and then Dad married Leona Williams, and
Right.
of course Mama Lee was a great singer, and just
Fantastic.
as unique and or authentic a harmony vocal that Bonnie had. I think Leona had even a more recognizable harmony voice than anybody else, and just a really good singer, and then Leona sang on the rest of the records from '78 until she and Dad got a divorce, and then. But when Dad and Leona got a divorce, then Bonnie came back, and
Yes.
and she was on the stage with him, singing. He played in the band for the remainder of her life and career. And
It's interesting to note that Bonnie was actually the maid of honor when Merle married his third wife, Leona Williams. After Merle's divorce from Leona, Bonnie returned as Merle's backup vocalist and remained with the band until she retired from music. Bonnie Owens passed away April 24th, 2006.
but from 1964 on, every single record was top 10 or better. And and of course, as I say, the rest was history. But it was in 1966 that Dad wrote "Sing Me Back Home," and he was looking at his career in '66. By then, he had two #1 records with "Swinging Doors" and "Bottle Let Me Down," and top 10 record and a top 20 record, and he just won the New Male Vocalist of the Year award. He was on his way, and he was thinking, man, how quickly things had turned around since San Quentin back in 1960, right? And he realized that the advice of that old man in San Quentin is what got him thinking on a positive way. And he wrote "Sing Me Back Home" about that old man. And so that song was it was a big hit too. It was '1, and a lot of country artists back in the day always sang songs about prison and breaking the law and stuff. But Dad was, but most of them were just singing songs. Dad was actually telling his life story, and that's what made his life and his music so unique. It was honest. It was about him. And it wasn't until after "Sing Me Back Home" that it became public knowledge that Dad was actually an ex-convict. He had never told nobody. And in fact, it was Johnny Cash. When Dad told him the story, why he wrote the song, Johnny told him, said, "Merle, you need to let these people know why you're doing these songs, like Fugitive and Branded Man and all these prison songs. And, he let them know that this is part of your life. It's not some songs from your head, And Dad didn't want to do it. He was ashamed of that period of it, or that part of his life. But John convinced him that he needed to let people know. And that's after that song was when people found out that he was an ex-convict. But he was somebody, as they say, that, you know, well, you know, it was 12 years later, Dad was voted Man of the Year in Bakersfield by the same people that sent him to San Quentin prison 12 years earlier.
That's
So
amazing.
yeah, it's one of those great American stories, right? And
Yeah.
and you know, and it was in 72, 12 years after he was released, that we were invited to the White House by the President of the United States. Spent a whole week in there. And I was there, and I was a 13, 14-year-old kid. And I always tell people jokingly that only in America can you go from the jailhouse to the White House in 12 years. You know?
But he was so incredibly talented, both as a singer and a songwriter.
He
I
was
mean,
not
these
only
songs.
talented, he was good looking. He was Hollywood good looking when he was young, you
Yeah.
know? In fact,
Yeah.
Hollywood tried to make a star out of him in the 70s, back when he was in his prime, because he was James Dean good looking, and
Sure.
big, real dark, black, wavy hair, big blue eyes, and he was just a good looking dude. And then he could sing, and in my opinion, as good a songwriter as there's ever been in country music. You know, collectively, his body of work is unequaled. And Chris Christopherson agreed with that statement. He said he was the greatest singer-songwriter in country music history, and it's not even a close second.
Yeah.
And,
I
you
would
know,
definitely agree with that. Looking
um,
through, looking through the listing of all of his songs, once he hit, he what all my friends are going to be strangers was, like, I guess, one of the very
that was
first.
actually the first. See, all my friends are going to be strangers. I can't sing a sad song is what I believe was first, and then it was all my
Yes.
friends are going to be strangers, and and then Fugitive, and
Yeah.
yeah, I actually looked. You can't really go by the they talk about number one records,
Yes.
and but back in the day there was three different uh, charts.
Charts.
One was
Yes.
Billboard, one was Cashbox, and one was Record World. And
Right.
I've heard he's had 38 number one records, 42 number one records, 40, this and that, whatever.
Mhm.
Dad actually had 48 number one records, but he had about five singles that were two-sided hits. Back in the day, there's 1969, for instance, Bonnie and Clyde was the number one single, but it was the flip side was Today I Started Loving You Again. And they both went to number one. So it was a two-sided number one record. And Dad had, if the truth be known, he probably had over 50 number one records, but he had 110 top 10 records. And
Wow.
Every single record he ever cut from 1964 until 1987, every single record was top 10 or better.
Merle had several self-penned number one hits during the late 60s, including Mama Tried, The Legend of Bonnie and Clyde, Hungry Eyes, and Sing Me Back Home, along with many more. Merle recorded I'm a Lonesome Fugitive, another song written by Liz Anderson along with her husband Casey Anderson in March of 1967, taking the song to number 3 on the country charts. In 1969, Merle wrote Okie from Muskogee with Roy Edward Burris. Other hits written by Merle Haggard were Bottle Let Me Down, If We Make It Through December, Workin' Man Blues, Fight Inside of Me, and Daddy Frank. These are some of the 250 songs that Merle Haggard wrote and recorded. In 1972, the then governor of California, Ronald Reagan, pardoned Merle Haggard for his past crimes. Merle kept taking songs to the top of the charts, with songs like It's Not Love, But It's Not Bad, written by Hank Cochran and Glenn Martin. I Wonder If You Ever Think of Me, written by Merle. Everybody Had the Blues in 1973, also written by Merle. Things Aren't Funny Anymore, 1974. Old Man from the Mountain, 1974. Always Wanting You in 1975. It's All in the Movies, 1975, written by Merle and his daughter Kelly. And The Roots of My Raisin in 1976, written by Tommy Collins and Merle. Along with Cherokee Maiden in 1976, written by Cindy Walker. Haggard appeared on the cover of Time magazine on May 6, 1974. He wrote and performed the theme song to the television series Moving On, which gave him and his band The Strangers another #1 hit in 1975. He appeared on an episode of The Waltons called The Comeback, which aired October 10th, 1976. In 1978, Merle married Leona Williams. Leona worked for several years on Merle's shows, penning such hits as Someday When Things Are Good and You Take Me for Granted. Merle and Leona released a duet called The Bull and the Beaver in 1978, which made it all the way up to the #8 position on the country chart. The couple released an album in 1983 titled Heart to Heart. Ironically, Merle and Leona were already divorced by the time it was released.
Because in my opinion, Leona Williams was, she was Rhonda Vincent before Rhonda Vincent. You know what I mean? And
Right.
just a really good singer and just a really, really good person. She's still, I talk to Mama Lee probably at least once every 2-3 weeks, and she'll call me just to laugh, and I'll call her just to laugh, and I call her Mama Lee. She calls me her bonus son. But my mama's name was Leona. She was the first wife, and then of course Mama Lee is the third wife. Her name's Leona. The two, as good as Bonnie was, there's nobody better than my mama and Mama Lee. Okay, and Mama Lee's, I think she's as fine. You can't be a better person than Mama Lee. That's all there's to it.
I would agree. I would agree 100%. She's been a friend of mine for many, many years now, and I know. And this has been, gosh, probably 20 years ago, first time that we worked with her.
No, really.
And she called me to get with me about the song list, and we talked for 3 hours.
Yeah, and you don't have to say hello. Me and Mama Lee are a lot alike that way. All you got to do is say hello to us, and we'll take over from there. And we'll probably be talking for a while.
Well, I love her so very much, and I saw where I met you, the Next Generation show in Nashville. This past year, you sang with Leona Williams.
I did.
And her son Ron.
Oh, Ron, yeah.
And I loved it. She wrote "You Take Me for Granted,"
right?
And she co-wrote "Someday When Things Are Good" with Merle, correct?
Right.
They were both #1s for your dad.
Yes, they were.
But I could tell that the audience was clearly moved by the kind words you spoke about her on stage.
But those were sincere words.
Yes.
In fact, I write songs. I'm pretty good with words. I'm not bad with them, but I've yet to find the words that truly describe my love for Leona Williams. Her influence in my life is beyond where I've tried to paint this picture for Mama Lee my whole life, and still don't think I could have ever made her understand what a difference she made in my life. Because at the time that she came into it, I was 15, 16, 17. I was at a period in my life as a boy where, I was confused, going through that separation with my mama and not being allowed to see her no more. And then, of course, then Bonnie come on the scene and got really close to Bonnie. About the time she got really close to Bonnie, then she left. And I was just, and just going through puberty like all kids do anyway. And I was just real confused. And I don't know, but I was a quiet kid, real quiet. And I kept all of my pain inside. And I was just really, really having a hard time with trusting people. And because every time I'd get to the point of loving them, they'd leave. And I was afraid to love Mama Lee, because I just knew she's going to leave. And but she pulled. Well, I to best I can paint the pictures, I think, the Father in heaven always sent me somebody throughout my life. Whenever I would start sliding away from trust and love and giving up on love, He'd always send me somebody to pull me back. And Mama Lee was the one that probably reinstilled my faith in love. And she kept my heart tender as opposed to getting calloused. And, Mama Lee's the first person to ever get me on stage. And
is she?
Yeah, she was. She's the one I blame for all this. Okay. I was 16 years old and nobody even knew I sang. I didn't even know that Mama Lee knew I sang, but I don't know how they found out, because I wasn't real outgoing about playing guitar and singing. I was a shy kid. But Mama Lee apparently thought I was good enough to be in front of people, but she tricked me. She took me on a trip with her. She was doing a show up in Ohio. And back when I was about 16 years old, just me and her went to this show she was booked to do. And it was 10,000 people in that auditorium that night. And she was up there doing her show, and I'm on the wings of the stage sitting there listening. She starts to introduce somebody that she's going to bring up. And I'm thinking, I had no idea what I was thinking. She's calling somebody up, and finally, would you please make welcome Marty Haggard? And I'm like, what? I had never sang in front of people. I had never sang with a band. I'm real shy, and oh my God, but it was Mama Lee. So I bit my tongue and just went on out there, and I sang 2 songs. The only 2 songs I knew at that time that I can remember were 2 Lefty songs that I learned from Lefty. That's the way love goes, and I never go around mirrors. And anyway, I sang those 2 songs and got a standing ovation. I'm like, that's first. But anyway, long story, extremely long story. Mama Lee, she is, I don't call her Mama. I mean it. The only thing separates me from, the difference between me and Ron is her blood runs in his veins. But
yeah.
I consider her my mama. And in fact, sometimes I call her Mama Junior. I've got my mama, and who nobody will ever replace my mama. But I can't love anybody any more than I love Mama Lee. And the reason is, I think that might be the case because I know she loves me. And
exactly.
Dad actually got mad at me when they first got a divorce. It was a rough time of Dad's life, and he took that separation and breakup pretty hard, and he was mad, and but he found out we were still had a relationship, and he found out. He asked me, "What the blankety blank you doing talking to that blankety blank woman?" I said, "Dad, you divorced her. I didn't. I love her. Okay, she's gonna be my friend till the day I die."
Merle recorded Barroom Buddies with Clint Eastwood in 1980, I Think I'll Just Stay Here and Drink, and My Favorite Memory in 1981. Although Merle was now a huge star in the country music industry, he was also fighting a battle with alcohol and drugs. Merle admitted to using cocaine in a 1983 interview. In 1981, he signed with Epic Records. The same year, he released his autobiography, Sing Me Back Home. Merle's career continued to flourish during this period. Some of his hits from this time are Big City, Yesterday's Wine with George Jones, Going Where the Lonely Go, You Take Me for Granted, Poncho and Lefty with Willie Nelson, That's the Way Love Goes, Someday When Things Are Good, Let's Chase Each Other Around the Room, A Place to Fall Apart, and Natural High. In 1985, Haggard married Debbie Parrott. Their marriage lasted 5 years. She received co-writing credit for Thank You for Keeping My House on A Friend in California album. They divorced in 1991. Merle's last #1 was Twinkle Twinkle Lucky Star from the smash album Chill Factor in 1988.
Well, it was a different era of the music business in general, but especially country music, relative compared to today, for instance. Back in from Dad, when he first started until probably at least into the mid to late 70s, all the artists did 2 albums a year, and and 12 songs on every album, and they would pick 2 singles off each album, so that was 4 singles a year, and 2 songs out of 12. And that's why, by the way, that Dad had a lot of songs that are considered to be hit records and classics that were never singles at all. Silver Wings was never a single. It was on an album, and Footlights was never a single. It was on an album. Some of the most requested songs I get of my dad were never singles, and but they didn't have enough time. They had 12 songs on every album, and they had 2 albums a year. Nowadays they have 10 songs on 1 album every 2 years.
Yes.
And so Dad had so much material, and he had to pick 2 songs off every album, which means 10 of them just sat there on the album. And his songs were all so good. And there's so many songs that never seemed, I mean, we could be here all day long talking about songs that I think were better than some of the singles that they put out that were on the albums. And Shelley's Wonder Love is just a stupid good song.
It is an amazing song. Yeah.
And, songs like You Ain't Got Very Far to Go. And, I could go down every album that he did from 65 on. There was a couple, 3 songs on every one of those albums that I think were better than songs that they put out as a single. So his body of work was second to none.
His albums, I mean, of course, you put an album of his on and just listen to it.
Yeah.
There was no jumping around. You just listen to the album because all the songs are great.
People do it. So. They weren't standing around waiting for Merle Haggard's next single. They were waiting for his next album.
Right.
People would run to the store and buy his album and sit there. And unlike a lot of artists, not all of them, but most of them, there's 3 or 4 songs on the album you might like, and the rest of them are saying, it's okay. But boy, it was just Dad's albums from top to bottom. Go listen to Chill Factor. From top to bottom, it's like every single song is like, my God, how good that stuff is. Every single one of his albums, his album 190 Proof, every single song is like, dang, does this guy ever sing a bad song? No, he don't. And and this is not biased opinion. This is factual. And I was there, so I don't think that I appreciate him as much as the outsider does, because I take it for granted probably a little bit. And but there's been so many albums over the years that I haven't sat down and listened to in a long time. Like it was the other day, I pulled on my phone. I was pulling up a song off Chill Factor album, and I listened to it. And my phone gave me the option to listen to every song on that album, and I did. And I said, man, I forgot about this album. Forgot how good these songs were, And then I started realizing, man, he had the Back to the Barrooms album was great. And I started looking back on those albums, and like I said, that people weren't waiting for a single on him. They're waiting for his albums because you knew you was going to get 12 really good songs twice a year.
Merle and Teresa Lane were married on September 11th, 1993. They went on to have 2 children, Janessa and Ben. Their marriage lasted until Merle's death in 2016. Merle released a follow-up autobiography called My House of Memories for the record in 1999. Over the course of Merle Haggard's career, he recorded somewhere around 70 solo albums. This number does not include albums that were reissues, compilations, soundtracks, or albums of others that Merle sang on. It is believed that he would bring the total to roughly 150 albums. Merle won many CMA and ACM awards, winning Entertainer of the Year for both organizations in 1970. He was inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame in 1977 and the Country Music Hall of Fame in 1994. In 1984, Merle won a Grammy for Best Vocal Performance Male for That's the Way Love Goes. He received a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 2006. Merle also received a Kennedy Center Honors Award in 2010. This is only a small portion of the awards Merle received for his accomplishments in country music. He fought with health issues throughout his career. In 1995, he underwent angioplasty to treat blocked arteries. In 2008, he was diagnosed with lung cancer. Surgeons removed part of his lung containing a lemon-sized tumor. Merle played 2 shows less than 2 months after his surgery. Merle and Willie Nelson recorded Django and Jimmy, which was released in June of 2015. This was the 6th and final collaborative project for the duo.
Just before Dad died, Dad and Willie cut that Django and Jimmy.
Yes.
And some other projects. They've done a couple projects after Punch on Lefty together near the end. And both of them were well past their prime as far as their ability to sing. But like Johnny Cash's project, it was still, I don't know, Dad always could sing, even when he got in his 70s, he could still sing. He didn't have the power he used to have, But he could still maintain pitch and all that good stuff. But there was just always something to me that was really, really unique and attractive about what Johnny Cash did and Dad and Willie did. And But him and Willie, they had some major success with that Django and Jimmy album. I mean, that one song called "Going to Pot," everything going to pot.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
loved it.
they had such a mutual love for each other, my dad and Willie, and respect for each other's songwriting, and they were, Chris Christopherson and my dad, and Willie and my dad were his bestest buddies.
Though Merle's health was declining, he continued to tour. On February 6, 2016, Haggard was performing at the Mandalay Bay Ballroom in Las Vegas. Toby Keith showed up at the concert. Merle was in bad shape and asked Toby, "How many songs do you know of mine?" Toby said, "All of them." After a few songs into the concert, Merle introduced Toby to the audience and Toby finished the show. Although Merle's health was failing, he had continued to book shows hoping he would get better and continue touring.
Your dad left such a huge footprint on country music as a whole. There's so many uh, people that still listen to his music all the time, and yet there are few people that even come close to the kind of legacy that he left with his singing and his songwriting. So um, one of the things that amazed me though is that he continued, people like him and Willie that continued to travel, and and your dad worked up until the end of his life.
Yeah.
um my understanding is he passed it on his tour bus. Is that true?
Yes, it is. He wanted to
Okay.
die on the bus.
Yes. So so do you think he just didn't know any different, that he still loved it that much, that he stayed on the road till the very end?
Well, Dad, I don't know exactly where this phobia, you want to call it that, came from. I have some general opinions on what it may have been about. His dad died when he was 9, and being in San Quentin prison and being put in solitary confinement for a week or two all by yourself. But Dad Dad hated being alone. And
Really?
he hated being. That's why he ended up marrying. He went from one woman to the next, because he couldn't stand to be alone, and that's why some of the people that he had around him over the years were a bunch of yes men. Some of them, not all of them, but some of them, and he would let his guard down because he was so desperate not to be alone. Sometimes some of those yes men and users would get in there, but Dad hated being alone, and I think that the road work and being on the road with the band and being in an auditorium with a bunch of people kept him from being alone. And he feared being alone. I heard him say it. And he said, I just don't like being alone.
Merle's final performance was on February 13th at the Paramount Theater in Oakland, California. On the morning of April 6, 2016, Merle Haggard's 79th birthday, he died from complications of pneumonia on his tour bus, which was parked at his home in Palo Cedro, California. A private funeral service was held at Merle's ranch. The funeral began with a recording of Lefty Frizzell singing "I Love You 1,000 Ways." Songs were also sung by Connie Smith, Chris Christopherson, and former band member Ronnie Reno. Marty Stewart officiated the service. Fortunately, Merle's music lives on through his recordings. New generations are now listening to music of Merle Haggard through all forms of media streaming. His songs about struggles of the common working man continues to touch listeners of all generations. Up-and-coming artists continue to pay homage to Haggard, and his songs can still be heard in every honky-tonk across this country and venues around the world. Thank you for watching another episode of Classic Country Backstories, and we want to thank Marty Haggard for talking with us. We sure do appreciate him. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the bell button for notifications of future episodes. Until next time, take care, God bless, and I'll see you later.